Chapter 11. Soft Rock Bar. It was a weekend, and the bar was livelier than usual. People gathered inside, chatting and sipping drinks, occasionally discussing work or personal lives, while also sharing tidbits of insider gossip. Perhaps due to a few drinks, many found it hard to stop talking, unconsciously spilling secrets they would normally keep quiet. In my opinion, Patrick's patron must be that person, right? You mean Eloise, the QS Corporation heiress? Leonardo paused slightly in his bartending, then continued his tasks as if nothing had happened, his expression impassive. It's not certain if she's his patron. Eloise's promotion of Patrick since taking office is a bit puzzling. I'm sure he's being supported. I heard from my friend that Eloise has been taking him to various events for the past 2 years, which is how many big shots got to know Patrick. How long has he been in the industry? Yet he's already landed so many high-profile endorsements. No way there's no hidden deal. And wasn't the Big Soft charity gala tonight? I bet Patrick went because of Eloise. But I remember Eloise has been dating. Didn't she have a fling with that model, Carrie? Please, with her wealth, she can play around all she wants. Besides, dating a model doesn't stop her from promoting young talents. At the bar, 2 girls were passionately discussing, one analyzing, the other confirming, as if they'd witnessed everything firsthand. Leonardo quickly finished mixing the drinks and served the 2 glasses to them, his voice carrying an icy chill. Your drinks. The bar's air conditioning was already strong, and Leonardo's voice made it feel even colder. The girl who mentioned playing around looked up and met Leonardo's gaze, his icy stare freezing her in place, forgetting his good looks as she felt a chill down her spine. Oh, okay, thank you. Leonardo glanced briefly at the other girl before returning his attention to the sink, meticulously washing glasses, though his movements were rougher than usual. The 2 girls soon regained their composure, lowering their voices as they whispered to each other. The air conditioning here is too low, I'm getting goosebumps. Right? That bartender's look was so scary, it's like he caught us burning down his house. But he's kinda cute. The topic shifted from gossiping about Eloise's love life to admiring the bartender's looks. Not daring to speak loudly in his presence, they murmured their admiration. Meanwhile, Leonardo seemed lost in thought, focusing on the glass under the tap, which he had been washing for over 5 minutes. His mind replayed the morning at the hospital, the lingering scent of her perfume stubbornly clinging to his senses, making him recall the scene and what she said. Their text conversation was clean, limited to the $3,000 transaction. He should have deleted it. They shouldn't have had any connection. Yet, unconsciously, he let her stay in his messages, at the top of his notifications. Eloise's intentions were too obvious. Each encounter she blatantly showed her desires, so intense it was overwhelming. Yet her tactics were clever, like a skilled hunter. He wanted to escape, but always fell into her traps. Bang. His thoughts were abruptly pulled back as he accidentally dropped a glass into the sink, realizing something. His expression darkened, like a looming storm. How long have you been working here, little brother? A sweet voice interrupted, distinctly different from Eloise's tone. It was the 2 girls from earlier. Leonardo suppressed his irritation, turned off the tap, and picked up another glass, acting as if he hadn't heard. He carefully dried the glass with a clean towel, treating it like a precious treasure. Left ignored, the ladies felt awkward, their faces showing embarrassment, mentally grumbling about the bartender's attitude. How old are you, little brother? Are you single? Leonardo put down the glass, then coldly announced, underage, kept by a sugar mama. The repeated rejections left the ladies embarrassed, their faces turning pale, muttering, teasing us, what's with the attitude, before leaving together. Silence resumed, Leonardo's coldness eased slightly, but his mind replayed the women's words. Patrick, a name he'd never heard, repeatedly surfaced, like an annoying fly he couldn't shoo away. His jaw tightened, suppressed anger flared again. Leonardo stood there, his body still recovering, his face pale, evoking pity. How's your health? The bar manager, having attended to customers, approached and asked suddenly. Leonardo paused, then replied indifferently, "It's fine." "Really? Weren't you hooked up to an 4 this morning?" The manager thought of the message Eloise sent him that afternoon, unsure whether to be happy that a soft rock employee caught Eloise's eye or envious of Leonardo's luck. Leonardo remained cold towards the manager's unexpected concern. As the manager of Soft Rock, he held significant authority. The bar's behind-the-scenes owner savored leisure, leaving the operations to the manager and only doing spot checks when visiting with friends. Soft Rock employees knew this, making the manager's position almost second only to the owner. Many employees tried to curry favor with him, aware that while salaries were fixed, benefits and bonuses were flexible. If the manager deemed someone good, extra money at the end of the month wasn't difficult. The manager was not young, having navigated through many young minds. Leonardo, however, was uniquely different. Since Leonardo's hiring, their interactions were minimal, mostly work-related. Leonardo was indeed young, but more composed than his peers, often leaving the manager unsure of his thoughts. Initially, the manager hesitated to hire Leonardo, preferring manageable subordinates. Leonardo's unpredictable nature was risky. Yet, his aloofness and lack of petty maneuvers, plus his exceptional bartending skills, eventually swayed the decision. After several reconsiderations, the manager hired Leonardo, only to find his luck too good, forcing the manager to treat him well. "I'm fine. Don't be stubborn. If you can't manage, take leave. I'll have Eric replace you." Leonardo's hands paused, meeting the manager's ambiguous gaze, his eyes deep, momentarily overwhelming the manager, who chuckled and explained, "All right, Eloise messaged me, saying you should leave early today to rest." "Her?" Leonardo frowned, looking away, his tone uneasy as he asked, "What does she have to do with it?" "Hey, she's our Soft Rocks VIP, you can't talk like that," the manager said, lighting a cigarette from his pocket, starting to smoke. "You should be nicer to Eloise in the future. With her status, many rich young men would flock to her at a wave. Don't take her kindness for granted," the manager advised, taking a drag. "For someone like Eloise, her interest fades quickly. Be smart, take advantage of this time for benefits, then why come here to suffer?" The manager's words were reasonable, painfully true, making Leonardo's slight irritation fade, leaving only a speck of sadness. Yes, she was just a player from the start. It will soon be over and life will return to normal. "I won't elaborate. Eric is here, pack up and go rest. Don't worry, your pay won't be deducted." The manager finished his cigarette, patted Leonardo's shoulder, then left. Leonardo stood still, looking at his hand, still faintly bruised from the 4 that morning. Honey's words can't be taken seriously, remember that. Indeed, her words, not to be taken seriously. Chapter 12. Leonardo left the bar at just after 9, the street less crowded than his usual return, but not deserted. Used to darkness and silence, the sudden exposure to a lively night felt uncomfortable. Like someone accustomed to solitude being thrust into a crowd, loneliness amplified. Leonardo clutched his backpack, catching the last bus back to his rental. The bus was sparsely populated, a few scattered passengers, while he sat at the rear window. From his pocket, he pulled out his phone, instinctively opening messages, focusing on the topmost conversation. His gaze deepened, then swiped left, deleting the transaction record. She wouldn't message him. There was no need. As he thought this, about to pocket his phone, a notification popped up. Patrick appears at Big Soft Charity Gala, donating. His fingers moved on reflex by the time he realized he was reading the full report. The reason said to exit, his eyes read through the article, clicking on related keywords. 20 minutes passed, he had a rough understanding of the star named Patrick. A 2-year debut star, young, attractive, praised for acting and multi-talented in music and dance, recently concluded a domestic tour. Overall, far more accomplished than him. So, why bother with him? Why appear at the bar's back door so late? Why take him to the hospital? Why? Leonardo frowned, recalling the bar manager's words by the bar. Irritation resurfaced silently. Yes, it was all impulsive. She, like her kind, quickly loses interest. Leonardo slipped his phone into his pocket and gazed outside the window. Beneath the comforting glow of streetlights, amidst the stream of cars and pedestrians, his emotions slowly settled, and his sparkling eyes returned to their usual cold and detached state. Half an hour later, Leonardo alighted from the bus, heading towards his rental. Soft Rock wasn't in the city center. Usually, Leonardo took a bus to work and cycled home at night. Today was his first early return. He expected a peaceful rest, but upon reaching his rental, found his luggage cruelly dumped at the door. His expression darkened immediately. He quickly approached the luggage, finding his clothes and documents inside. When he moved in, he brought just one suitcase. All furniture and facilities were provided. Essentially, his belongings were all he possessed. A thought hit him, and he hurriedly took out his keys, only to find the lock changed, the key not fitting. A clear fact, he was evicted by his landlord. His eyebrows furrowed, Leonardo swiftly called his landlord, ready to demand an explanation. The landlord wasn't asleep, currently watching soap operas in the living room. Upon receiving Leonardo's call, she disdainfully pouted, slowly answered, and asked, "Hello? What's up? I'm busy." "Explain." The man's tone was filled with unbridled anger, his face terrifyingly dark. "Explain? Oh, you mean the house thing," she said, her tone condescending. "I'm not renting it anymore. I've packed your stuff outside, and I've thrown away your other miscellaneous items, just some worthless stuff. Considering you've been renting for a few months, I won't charge you for the next couple of days. Find somewhere else to stay tonight." "What do you mean?" "The contract clearly states." Upon mentioning contract, her voice suddenly rose, scolding fiercely, "Hey, you ungrateful guy. What contract? You can't even afford such low rent. What are you talking about with contracts? If you really have the guts, sue me. Do you have the money to do so?" Leonardo pursed his lips, knowing he was duped. The landlord was right. He indeed lacked both the time and money to sue. 2 minutes later, the call ended, the landlord hanging up first. He stood there, his gaze heavy on the luggage. After a long while, Leonardo finally moved, bending down to rearrange the luggage, pulling the handle and walking towards the street. The night grew quieter, and the man's expression gradually returned to its initial indifference, unaffected by being suddenly evicted. Used to not being treated well by the world. Luckily, he still had over $3,000, enough for a night at a budget hotel, and tomorrow he could look for another rental. The streets were nearly empty at this hour. Leonardo, pulling his suitcase, looked somewhat desolate. Suddenly a roar echoed, followed by a strong wind, and then the screech of brakes. A fiery red Porsche abruptly halted beside him. The window rolled down, and the familiar, radiant face appeared in front of him. "Get in." Leonardo looked at the seemingly descended from heaven woman, his lips slightly parted as if to say something, but eventually closed, standing silently. Eloise glanced at the suitcase by the man's feet, then at him. His black hair softly fell over his forehead, dressed in a gray hoodie and black casual pants, his backpack obediently on his back, holding the suitcase handle, standing there like a fresh graduate, which he indeed was. His usual cold face seemed softer now, silently watching the woman in the driver's seat, his indifferent expression in the quiet night oddly endearing. Eloise narrowed her eyes, mentally cursing. "Who does this poor baby belong to? My heart is melting. Get in, it's windy outside." When speaking again, Eloise's voice softened. She was on her way back to her apartment when Luke called, telling her Leonardo was evicted. Luke's private investigator was still on the job, having seen Leonardo's landlord secretly showing his rental to other tenants. Obviously, something was up. Sure enough, tonight, the landlord threw out Leonardo's things, even changing the lock. Eloise's first reaction was anger. Then she messaged the bar manager, learned he just got off work, and called Luke for the address. Luckily, she arrived in time. Such a good-looking boyfriend. Staying outside is dangerous. What if some wicked aunties take advantage? But in truth, she was the wicked auntie. Why are you here? Leonardo's voice, carried by the night breeze, sounded light yet held a surprise and other unclear emotions. What do you think? Eloise leaned on the car window, sweeping her hair back, revealing her dazzling face even in the dark. It's chilly at night. I'm here to give warmth. She grinned, her smoky eyes more alluring. Can't park here. Hurry up. I might get a ticket. Leonardo knew it was a joke, but complied when Eloise opened the trunk. He put in his suitcase, closed it, and stepped onto this thief ship. 3 seconds later, the red Porsche sped away, the roar echoing through the silent street, much like Eloise herself, very audacious. Inside the car, Leonardo quietly sat in the passenger seat, not speaking. But as they entered the city center, he suddenly broke the silence. Just drop me at the hotel entrance, thanks. There were no inns, let alone hotels, where he was, but in the city center, accommodations were plentiful. Eloise understood Leonardo's intention but didn't expose it. She slightly raised an eyebrow, looking forward, her smile since seeing him hadn't faded. Don't worry, I'll take you to a high-end hotel, free of charge. Hearing this, Leonardo immediately doubted. Half an hour later, as the red Porsche mercilessly sped past roadside hotels, entering a high-end residential area, the man's face darkened. Chapter 13. What do you mean? Inside the quiet car, the man's face was dark, his tone laced with a hint of gritted teeth. Eloise unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to look at the man sitting in the passenger seat, a smirk playing on her lips as she retorted, "What do you think I mean?" The lighting in the underground parking garage was especially dim, intensifying the alluring atmosphere within the car. The faint white light outside the car cast a glow on the woman's profile, her eyes exceptionally bright in the darkness, burning with intensity. Almost instinctively, Leonardo's pupils contracted, and his breath caught for a moment. What could it mean? At 9 or 10 at night, bringing a young man to her apartment, was she driven by lust or sheer audacity? Did she misunderstand men? Or was this her usual practice, picking up any man on the street and bringing him home without a second thought? With these thoughts, the man's lips pressed tightly together, and a chill emanated from him, causing the warmth that had just risen in the car to plummet again. "I want to get out." The door was still locked, and even though he was furious and wanted to slam the door and leave, he couldn't. Eloise raised her eyebrows slightly, puzzled as to why the young man was suddenly throwing a tantrum. Truth be told, out of all the relationships Eloise had been in, Leonardo was the most challenging. Although some were also temperamental, they generally watched her mood. She had never been the one to depend on others in a relationship. For her, dating was merely a seasoning of life. Those ex-boyfriends of hers probably knew their place, so they never overstepped their bounds. Leonardo, however, was the most ungrateful one she had met. Yet, inexplicably, she found him invigorating, never feeling bored no matter what. Eloise's smile remained, and she grabbed his backpack in front of him, pulling it forcefully towards her. The woman's action was too sudden, and Leonardo instinctively tightened his grip on the backpack, his body being pulled towards her. The distance between them shortened, their eyes locking, and the hidden heat in the air was ignited instantly. "What are you doing?" The man's brow furrowed, the wolf-like nature beneath his cold exterior revealed, like a beast arching its back, baring its teeth at the approaching enemy. A soft laugh echoed in the car, ignoring the warning. Eloise leaned in further, stepping closer, invading his territory. "Late at night, alone with a man. What do you think I'm doing? Haven't you already guessed?" Her voice was light, occasionally breathy, yet exceptionally magnetic. Eloise's unconcealed dominance put Leonardo completely on the defensive, a sense of loss of control rising, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was 10. His face darkened, and the man's arm muscles tensed again as he yanked the backpack back to his embrace. The burning sensation in his palm was the result of overexertion. Eloise knew Leonardo was genuinely angry now, so she didn't dare tease him further, afraid she might push him too far and he'd leave. No more jokes, get out of the car. I'm not the type to force someone against their will, Eloise said, turning and stepping out of the car. Unknown to them, the door lock had already been opened. Leonardo sat in the passenger seat, still clutching his backpack, his expression as cold as ice, making it impossible to guess his emotions at that moment. The faint fragrance of the woman still lingered in the car, a familiar scent. He had unconsciously memorized her perfume. The hood of the car was lifted, and Leonardo snapped out of his trance, quickly getting out of the car and shouldering his backpack. Eloise stood by the hood of the car, not intending to help with the luggage, while Leonardo quickly walked over after getting out, took out his luggage, closed the car hood, and then stood quietly, waiting for Eloise to speak. Despite being fierce just moments ago, he now seemed unexpectedly meek. A strange urge to laugh arose, and Eloise curled her lips, twirling her car keys on her finger before they fell into her palm. Let's go. Eloise lived in a residential complex owned by QS Corporation. After returning from studying in the U.S., she moved out of her parents' home, ostensibly to cultivate her independence, but in truth, she just didn't want to be tied down by the family. Her glorious, romantic history was well known among her circle, and her family certainly knew about it too. But Eloise had always been an outstanding child, and her family didn't worry much. Though aware she was a bit casual about relationships, they understood Eloise had her limits, so they always took a lenient approach. Moreover, Eloise's father had always practiced a pampering policy towards her, believing that a girl should see more of the world so she wouldn't be taken advantage of by scoundrels, thus further inflating Eloise's boldness, leaving her mother both angry and amused. However, in the past 2 years, as Eloise's age has increased and she gradually took over QS Corporation, her parents have become more critical of her love life. Eloise got tired of the nagging and moved out. Living alone was indeed liberating, though there were small inconveniences when no one was there to take care of things. At least she could now bring home a stray wolf without worry. 10 minutes later, Leonardo stood in the spacious living room, his luggage in hand, momentarily dazed. After bringing Leonardo to her apartment, Eloise essentially ignored him, taking off her jewelry and walking barefoot towards her room, saying nonchalantly, "There's a guest room in the apartment. The housekeeper always keeps it clean. You can stay there for now. Everything you need is in the bathroom. Feel free to shower." Leonardo's gaze followed the woman's back. The living room was brightly lit, and he finally saw her outfit for the day. Recalling the gossip from the 2 ladies at the bar, she must have just come back from some charity gala with that Patrick guy. Her skin looked even paler in the apricot-colored dress. Her hair, previously draped over her shoulders, was now swept over her chest, revealing her smooth back and slender waist. The dress was designed like gauze, ethereal yet added a touch of allure with its back design, which on Eloise came across as both elegant and sexy. She was beautiful, both her face and her figure. "Oh, and wake me up when you get up tomorrow morning." Eloise suddenly poked her head out from the room and said to the man in the living room with a smile. The next moment, the door slammed shut and the living room returned to silence. Leonardo looked at the closed door, then at the jewelry she had scattered on the floor. Expensive jewelry lay scattered, each piece worth several years' income for an average working-class family. The man's eyes deepened, finally picking up the jewelry and neatly placing it on the living room coffee table. The apartment was spacious, and despite its simple decor, it exuded luxury. Such a large apartment, occupied by just her, was a bit too desolate. Leonardo found the guest room Eloise mentioned and dragged his suitcase to the bed, then sat quietly, reminiscing about the events of the day. It was surreal, whether it was being rescued by her at 4 in the morning outside the bar or meeting her on the street at 9 at night. Everything today seemed too dramatic. The air was filled with a faint scent of freshener, indicating regular cleaning. The room was spacious, larger than his previous rental. Too comfortable, too serene. And he shouldn't be in such an environment. 10 minutes later, Leonardo opened his suitcase, took out clean clothes, and headed to the bathroom. He just wanted a quick shower, but surprisingly, even the guest bathroom was fully stocked, just as Eloise had described it, like a luxury hotel. After his shower, the man looked at himself in the mirror, trying to push away all the chaotic thoughts and emotions. Just one night, he thought, as long as this night passes, he'll find a new place tomorrow and there won't be any further interactions. With that thought, his eyes darkened, a shade of sadness in the stillness. Meanwhile, Leonardo in the guest room was thinking about clearing his relationship, while Eloise, oblivious to his thoughts, was in her room after a shower, applying a facial mask and her daily skincare routine. She was never one to cater to others, so after bringing Leonardo home, she adopted a let-it-be attitude. Logically, something should have happened between a man and a woman alone together. Yet she wanted some spark, but her little unfortunate one didn't agree. Besides, Eloise wasn't into forcing someone into something, not a bandit from the old times. It's the civilized society. She's quite decent. As she applied the mask and body lotion, Eloise's hand suddenly stopped, suddenly remembering the leftover shampoo and body wash from her ex-boyfriend in the guest room. Oops. That kid wouldn't misunderstand something, would he? Chapter 14. Eloise hadn't brought many men to her apartment since moving out of her parents' home, just a handful. She was extremely territorial and didn't like bringing outsiders to her apartment or allowing them into her company, even though they were her boyfriends. There were those who tried various excuses to visit her at work or leave traces of their presence in her apartment, but she found such tactics too childish to bother with. As long as they didn't cross her limits, she let them be. Today marked the first time she actively brought someone into her apartment, and the guy initially seemed quite reluctant. For a while, she dated a guy from the entertainment industry. He once had to flee to her place to escape fans who found him at home, and that was when the guest room was prepared. The shampoo and shower gel were his own, and the rest were purchased by her assistant Luke to match the standard of a 5-star hotel. When the little boyfriend saw the box of disposable toothbrushes and toothpaste, he was stunned for a long time, asking why she didn't just buy a set from the supermarket. What if someone else needs to stay in the future? Eloise had replied like that. Her little boyfriend had sulked over it, but she didn't bother comforting him. Not long after, they broke up, but the guest room was always kept clean, so bringing Leonardo in today wasn't a hassle. Eloise was concerned that Leonardo might overthink, but she had no intention of explaining, as it would only complicate things. After all, it would be awkward to mention her ex-boyfriends in front of him, right? It might scare him off before she even manages to reel him in. The next morning, Eloise woke up to the smell of something savory, rubbing her eyes as she realized the day was already bright outside. Opening the door, the aroma intensified, and Eloise stretched as she made her way to the kitchen. Sure enough, it was the boy busy cooking. Leonardo wore a gray short-sleeved shirt and black casual pants, his superior physique making even simple clothes look like high-end brands. He stood by the induction stove, wearing an apron he'd found somewhere, holding a pan in one hand and a spatula in the other, flipping the contents in the pan with practiced ease. His soft bangs fell over his forehead, and his expressionless face somehow exuded warmth at the moment, much more likable than his icy demeanor at the bar. Eloise didn't know how to cook. Being the future heiress of a family business, she'd hardly stepped into the kitchen. Although she had toyed with the idea of cooking for herself after moving out, she was defeated by the notion of talent after a few attempts. The kitchen was fully equipped, with oil, salt, and other seasonings readily available, but they were mostly just for show. "Why are you up so early?" A woman's voice suddenly came from behind, and Leonardo's movements paused slightly. Turning around, he unexpectedly saw a lot of exposed skin, his pupils contracting. He quickly averted his gaze as if electrocuted. Eloise observed Leonardo's reaction, and the next moment, a soft laugh broke the silence in the kitchen. Leonardo stared fixedly at the pot of dumplings, the sound of the woman's show of might in his ears, and the unexpectedly beautiful sight he just saw kept replaying, making him inexplicably flustered. Why was she so immodest in front of a stranger? Eloise had come out in her sleep dress, a black spaghetti strap exposing her collarbone and arms in the air, and the hem didn't reach her knees, revealing her slender and straight legs. The silk-like material of the sleep dress contrasted with her fair skin, adding an invisible allure with the black and white contrast. Eloise hadn't paid much attention when she came out of the room. She was used to being alone at home and didn't have many rules. By the time she realized it might not be appropriate, he had already turned his head stiffly. Frankly, she wasn't a conservative person, and even wearing a bikini at the beach felt normal to her, let alone this sleep dress with much more fabric. She had never thought Leonardo would be a pure-hearted person, but his reaction was indeed unexpected. Unexpectedly cute. Didn't you say you'd wake me up when you got up? Leonardo had adjusted his state, though his back was still tense, afraid he might accidentally see something he shouldn't. There was nothing in your fridge, just curry chicken rice. Hearing his non sequitur, Eloise raised her eyebrows, but didn't pursue the matter, turning to leave the kitchen and return to her room to freshen up. 15 minutes later, Eloise emerged from her bedroom fully dressed, only to find the man already ready, standing quietly in the living room. Just like when he entered the apartment the night before, he had his backpack on, his right hand on the handle of the suitcase, looking ready to leave after saying goodbye. The kitchen was spotless, as if no one had cooked there, and a plate of curry chicken rice sat on the dining table, still steaming. Seeing this, Eloise was almost amused. What a heartless little thing. So, you think I went through all that trouble to pick you up from the street late at night and let you stay, just for this plate of curry chicken? Was she too easygoing for him to think she was such an easy person? But then she remembered. It was she who proactively suggested bringing him back to her apartment, and now demanding a return seemed indeed shameless. However, in the business of chasing guys, Eloise had never cared about her reputation. Leonardo's expression tightened, ready to ask, "What do you want?" when Eloise suddenly spoke again. "Have you eaten?" The man stood there, momentarily stunned, then pursed his lips and said, "No." The chicken rice was meant for her as a thank you for her hospitality last night. He couldn't be so shameless as to make it for himself. Eloise didn't know whether to call him honest or foolish. Sighing softly, she pointed to the table, her tone gentler when she spoke again. "Make another bowl for yourself. Let's have breakfast, and I'll take you to find a place after." Leonardo was shocked, ready to decline, but Eloise shot him a cold glance, making him swallow the words he was about to say. Oddly enough, by the time he realized it, he was already holding a bowl of cooked dumplings from the kitchen, following her instructions to sit across from her. Leonardo looked at the dumplings in front of him, then at the elegantly eating woman opposite. His expression gradually darkened. He was completely being led around by the nose. Soft Rock Bar was frequented by all sorts of people, as it was a members-only establishment, mostly affluent individuals. But honestly, few had the same aura as Eloise. The nobility that was innate, emanating from her bones, was the true difference from ordinary people, as if constantly stating a fact. They were not in the same world. Eloise didn't have the habit of talking while eating, and since she was genuinely hungry, she didn't notice the man's minor mood swings. The curry chicken rice was something Luke had bought for her earlier, originally intended as a late-night snack, but given her disastrous cooking skills, the dumplings had been shelved. She never expected they would come in handy today. "Aren't you going to work?" Leonardo suddenly asked, breaking the silence. Eloise had just finished her meal. Putting down her fork, she slowly took a napkin, wiped her mouth, then propped her chin with one hand, smiling at the man across from her. "Don't worry, honey's company won't fall apart if I skip work for a day." The teasing remark made Leonardo's expression darken slightly, his grip on the fork tightening. "How much cash do you have on you now?" 3,000. So the money she transferred to him last night was his entire fortune? Eloise was momentarily speechless, remembering the task she had assigned to Luke earlier, then calmly asked, "I'll use the bathroom, eat up, and then I'll take you to find a place." "I can do it myself," Leonardo said, his tone stubborn. Eloise knew this was a boy's pride talking, but there was no need to coddle it at this point, so she bluntly pointed out, "So you want to find another landlord who'll kick you out late at night?" There was no room for him to argue. Watching the man's frustrated yet helpless expression, Eloise couldn't help but chuckle. "I'm not going to swindle you. Just eat, okay?" Hearing the tone that was almost like talking to a child, Leonardo frowned, his expression growing even worse, and looking at the rice in the plate, he lost his appetite. In the bedroom, Eloise carefully closed the door, then took out her phone from her pocket, calling Luke at the company. "How much did you tell the agent to rent that place for? 2,000? No, 1,000 is enough. Unreasonable? Can't you make an excuse to make it reasonable? I don't care, if this isn't done, I'll cut your salary this month." Chapter 15. Leonardo, dining in the restaurant, was oblivious to the meticulous arrangements made for him. By the time Eloise emerged from the bedroom, he had already finished his breakfast and even washed the dishes. Eloise raised an eyebrow. If not for the fear of scaring him, she might have considered keeping Leonardo around. Handsome, reserved, and hardworking, where could she find such a great boyfriend? However, Eloise preferred to take things slow, sticking to the principle of angling for a big fish with a long line. If she lacked patience, she would have wasted all these years. Before 9 a.m., they left the apartment and took the elevator to the underground parking lot. The upscale apartment complex housed wealthy residents, and the parking lot was filled with luxury cars. Among them, a fiery red Porsche stood out, much like Eloise herself. Leonardo pushed his suitcase, expressionless, towards the Porsche parked not far away, a subconscious action he didn't even realize. However, halfway there, the woman behind him suddenly spoke up. "Hey, where are you going?" Leonardo halted, turning to look at Eloise with a hint of confusion. Pointing in another direction, Eloise's lips curved slightly, her eyes teasing. "We're going to look at houses. Isn't it better to be discreet?" Leonardo's lips pressed into a thin line as he followed her gesture to see a black Range Rover quietly parked there, exuding a steady yet wild aura, quite contrary to her notion of discreet. Eloise's meaningful gaze burned hotly, stirring an urge in him to turn back time by half a minute. He had been too complacent, and this underlying awareness was a dangerous signal. Leonardo's face darkened as he stood silently, only moving again once Eloise started walking, following her in silence. Though the outcome was prearranged, to avoid suspicion, Eloise played the role of an actress, for the first time, taking Leonardo on a grand tour. From morning till afternoon, they viewed 5 or 6 houses, none of which were quite satisfactory, too expensive or poor surroundings. Leonardo had no particular expectations for a rental, just a suitable price, but Eloise seemed to have different ideas. Twice, just as Leonardo was about to nod in agreement, Eloise quickly rejected the options on his behalf, pulling him out, citing the poor environment. Each time, Leonardo wanted to say he didn't mind, but seeing her earnest expression, the words, "I'm fine with anything," never left his lips. It felt as if he was being cared for, making him feel somewhat apprehensive. After much circling, around 3 p.m., Eloise finally brought Leonardo to the agent's address sent by Luke. The agent, having been notified early, had arrived at the agency since morning, nearly falling asleep waiting. Upon spotting Eloise at the door, he jolted awake, instantly alert. "Are you here to look at properties? Our listings boast excellent environments and low prices. Interested?" The agent said, his face wrinkling with a smile, his demeanor undeniably enthusiastic. Eloise glanced at the agent, seeing nothing but obsequiousness in his grinning face. She inwardly criticized. What kind of person did Luke find? His acting is too poor. Fortunately, Leonardo didn't suspect anything. After discussing rental requirements, they followed the agent to view the actual residence. The previous displays were just preludes. Now was the time for vigilance. As expected, as soon as Leonardo stepped into the elevator, he doubted, "Are you sure the rent here is only 1,000? The agent stiffened, sweating profusely, forcing a smile. "Why would I lie to you? The landlord isn't short of money and recently moved abroad, so the house is under our agency. Then why doesn't he just sell the house? Leonardo's tone was light, but to the agent, it felt like 1,000 pounds. Sweat beads gathered on his forehead as he stammered, to be honest, this was the first property the landlord bought after making money. It has sentimental value, so he didn't plan to sell. Why rent it if he isn't short of money? Seeing the agent's smile becoming strained, Eloise intervened lightly. Maybe the landlord is just kind-hearted, wanting to provide a warm shelter for street kids? Her jest eased the tension, and Leonardo, suspicious before, felt less anxious. Ultimately, as long as the house suited him and the contract was sound, he didn't need to dwell on the landlord's reasons. Leonardo signed the contract, Eloise watching with a hint of satisfaction. She sighed inwardly, amused by her own actions. Doing good deeds without seeking recognition is quite unlike her. The rest of the process went smoothly. Eloise sat on the sofa, watching Leonardo sign his name on the contract, her expression faintly pleased. After explaining some details, the agent left around half an hour later, waving goodbye with a smile. With no one else present, Eloise relaxed, lounging on the sofa with her legs crossed. She folded her arms, looking at Leonardo with a slightly lazy yet sensual demeanor. Before Leonardo could thank her, Eloise spoke first. I've done you a big favor. Asking for a reward isn't excessive, right? Leonardo looked down at the woman. Despite his stance of seeming to overlook her, she indeed held the upper hand. What do you want? Her eyes glittered, and the next moment, she smiled even more charmingly. How about payment in kind? Chapter 16. Upon hearing this, the atmosphere stiffened. Leonardo's breathing halted, his face turning ashen. He knew Eloise had intentions, but she had never explicitly expressed them. Like a hunter lurking in the shadows, she hinted at her desires without ever rushing. Because they both understood, he had always kept his heart in check. However, he hadn't expected her to suddenly bare her fangs without any warning. You. His face darkened, lips pressed tight, eyes shadowed with unease. Then, the woman on the sofa stood up, flipping her hair over her shoulder, her voice light. Make me dinner. I've spent the whole day with you. A meal is the least you can do, right? Leonardo. His expression froze, a hint of bewilderment in his eyes. Moments later, his face hardened, as if thunderclouds loomed overhead. His jaw clenched, teeth gritted. Meeting her smiling face, Leonardo felt duped, swindled by her. Watching Leonardo's prolonged silence, Eloise arched a brow and spoke again. I asked the bar manager, "You're off today." Before Leonardo could respond, Eloise twirled her car keys and walked towards the door, her tone decisive. Let's go to the supermarket for groceries and essentials. It's almost 4, I'm hungry. Leonardo stood still, watching her retreating figure. An inexplicable calm washed over his anger. Yet soon, a new wave of irritability surged, not towards her, but himself. Allowing one's emotions to be swayed by another's actions or words, it was truly infuriating. The supermarket was not crowded. Eloise followed Leonardo, her gaze occasionally sweeping the shelves, not appearing like a shopper, but more like a supervisor inspecting. In truth, Eloise rarely visited supermarkets. Living with her parents at QS Corporation, whatever she needed was bought by others, never her concern. After moving out, she focused on her company, occasionally dating, rarely visiting supermarkets. If she needed something, a phone call sufficed, no need to waste time buying it herself. The visit to the supermarket was spontaneous, nostalgia from Leonardo's curry dish lingering. Granted, it was just instant noodles, hardly a testament to culinary skills. Eloise admitted her judgment was biased, influenced by subjectivity. But so what? She invested nearly $3 million in that house. Spending that on a meal wasn't excessive, was it? Thinking this, Eloise found herself amused. She was indeed pulling out all the stops. Shopping wasn't Eloise's forte. Thus, in the supermarket, she remained silent, occasionally offering suggestions. Though the time wasn't crowded, Eloise and Leonardo, standing there, attracted attention. Leonardo was exceptionally handsome, his aloof aura aloof, a character straight out of a comic. Eloise, clearly a noble lady, exuded grace without arrogance, overshadowing those around her. Everyone assumed they were a couple, even Leonardo briefly believed so, just a fleeting illusion. Leaving the supermarket around 5, Eloise initially planned to pay but didn't insist when Leonardo did instead. She pondered silently on the drive back, considering possibly reducing his rent further. Back at the apartment, Eloise lounged on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, while Leonardo cooked in the kitchen. The TV played in the living room, adding warmth to the apartment with its noise. Occasional sounds of cooking mingled with the TV's commotion, reaching Eloise's ears. It was a novel experience. Living alone in her large apartment, she never felt its emptiness. Today, she realized it was indeed sparse. Leonardo had long been self-sufficient, managing most chores when staying with his grandparents, cooking skills ingrained from a young age. Not out of maturity, merely necessity. As expected, Leonardo's cooking exceeded expectations. Eloise, full and content, reclined on the sofa, momentarily lacking desire to leave. The apartment, though small, was comfortable with good food and appealing company, making her own large abode seem less appealing. Reluctant to leave. For the first time, Eloise felt a whim to be unreasonable. The TV was switched off before dinner, the apartment returned to silence, only the kitchen's dishes breaking the quiet. Eventually, Leonardo finished, returning to the living room, his face softer, a barely perceptible smile, eyes gentler, unbeknownst to himself. Eloise, once formidable, now seemed more girlish, lounging lazily yet not lax, faintly alluring. Truly, Eloise was a captivating woman, seldom resistible by men. This made him wonder why she invested time in him. With her status, countless men flocked to her, surely more handsome, wealthier, and entertaining than him. If she sought amusement, they sufficed. Why him? What are you standing there for? Her voice broke the silence, pulling Leonardo from his suffocating thoughts. When are you going back? Leonardo asked, his expression impassive. What, already trying to get rid of me? Eloise lay there, her black hair cascading like a waterfall over the warm yellow sofa. Strands fell to the edge, mere centimeters from the floor, making him want to gather her hair up to keep it from getting dusty. Leonardo stood still, silent, his gaze growing deeper, lost in thought. After a moment, the woman's smile grew wider, a sly glimmer in her eyes as she reached out to Leonardo. I'm bloated. Pull me up and I'll leave. Leonardo's gaze fell on the delicate hand outstretched towards him, his eyes darkening. After a few seconds, he reached out and clasped it. Just as he was about to pull her up, unexpectedly, she exerted force first. Caught off guard, his body leaned towards her, while Eloise, who was lying on the sofa, took the opportunity to sit up, suddenly releasing his hand and swiftly wrapping her arms around his neck. Bang! The atmosphere became charged instantly, sparks flying in the cramped living room. Their proximity increased dramatically. Everything in front of him seemed to slow down. The gradually approaching face, the floating hair strands, the smile on her lips, and the triumphant gleam in her eyes, breathtaking. His pupils dilated, his breathing stopped, but his heartbeat became distinctly audible, loud and clear. What should I do? I'm having regrets. At just a fist's distance, Leonardo stared at the woman in front of him, her exquisite features, fair skin, and long eyelashes. He could even feel her breath on his face, tickling him, unsettling. What are you regretting? Leonardo asked almost instinctively. Of course, regretting letting you go, Eloise said, slightly lifting her chin. Just as Leonardo thought she was going to kiss him, she paused, her voice alluring. Come back to my apartment with me, okay? She was like a temptress, continuously testing his defenses. The strings of reason tightened, on the verge of breaking, when Leonardo finally snapped back to reality and pushed her away. In the end, in the quiet apartment, Leonardo sat alone on the sofa, calming the lingering emotions. Contrary to the surrounding silence, his turbulent heart remained restless, unable to settle down. Some time later, Eloise had already left, leaving him alone, deeply immersed in her casual jest, unable to extricate himself. After a long while, the man pulled out his phone, tapped on the woman's profile in his contacts, and typed into the clean chat box, "Leonardo, thank you." 3 minutes later, she replied, "If you're going to thank me, get some more muscles. I like abs and a V-line." Chapter 17. Once something starts, often the rest follows in a somewhat natural manner. The empty chat history became a bit richer with our exchange of greetings, but the actual frequency of our conversations was minimal. During the day, Eloise was busy handling various affairs at the company, and Leonardo wouldn't actively seek her out unless he had nothing better to do, which was usually when he was off duty. After that day, Eloise didn't use the opportunity to frequently visit his apartment, and none of the scenarios Leonardo had imagined occurred. He thought she would exploit the favor from before to mooch off meals, but in reality, she never mentioned anything from the past again, as if everything that had happened was just a dream he had conjured. She never took him to the hospital, never gave him money, never accompanied him to look at houses, and never even mentioned taking him back to her apartment. Leonardo knew that perhaps those small favors for her were trivial and long forgotten, just like the jokes she used to say. But what she didn't know was that those seemingly insignificant things had left a mark on someone's heart, becoming more profound with the passage of time. Eloise had no idea what her boyfriend was thinking, especially since she wasn't the clingy type to begin with. Moreover, in her mind, career was definitely more important than romance. She also knew that chasing guys required a balance of tension and release, so after teasing him on a whim, she couldn't make any big moves for a while. As the weather began to heat up in July and August, with the arrival of summer vacation, the company's projects also started to roll out one after another. In addition to the launch of a new cosmetic series, many films and TV shows under the company were also officially released, and the collaboration between QS Corporation Cinemas and Yoko Department Store was further advanced. Due to the intense workload, Eloise didn't have the energy to see Leonardo for a while, and it had been a week since their last text conversation. Before moving out of her parents' house at QS Corporation, Eloise had promised to come back for dinner at least once a week. Initially, she did, but gradually, due to busy company affairs and other miscellaneous matters, the frequency of her visits decreased, and now she would occasionally return once a month. With so many projects at the company recently, she forgot about this, and only when her mother called did she realize she hadn't been home in a long time. Feeling guilty, Eloise left work early that evening and drove to her parents' house in the suburbs. As soon as she got out of the car, she noticed a familiar Volkswagen Phaeton parked nearby, and a guess formed in her mind. When she entered the dining room, sure enough, she saw the expected person. "Yo, the busy lady finally finds time to come home," Niamh greeted as she sat in her chair, her sarcastic tone more laden with grievance and concern for her daughter's long absence. Eloise knew her mother's temper, so she just smiled and explained, "Mom, you know how hectic things are at the company lately." Niamh wasn't truly angry. The moment she saw her daughter, any irritation had vanished. Now, hearing her daughter's response, her expression softened, but she still played it cool, grumbling, "I don't care. You think you're busier than Jim? He still finds time to visit me every now and then." Eloise's gaze fell on Jim, who sat not far away, appearing humble and scholarly with a smile, though his eyes betrayed a hint of amusement. She inwardly rolled her eyes, but, considering her parents' fondness for Jim, she dared not voice any complaints in front of them. Instead, she continued to smile and obediently sat down beside her mother. "Mom, you know, I'm working hard to make you proud," she said, which was indeed true. When Eloise was appointed to the branch company, many board members were against it, even ridiculing her father. Despite the pressure, her father led Eloise. Eventually, Eloise lived up to expectations, satisfying all shareholders with her performance. Those who once scoffed at her now changed their tune, often praising Eloise at board meetings, showing their knack for riding the tide. Hearing this, Axel, reminded of the sycophantic flatteries from those old foxes at the shareholders' meeting a few days ago, felt a sense of pride as they were praising his beloved daughter. All right, Eloise rarely comes back, so let's not dampen the mood. Axel intervened, and Niev reluctantly dropped the subject, turning to ask Eloise about her well-being. Dinner was pleasant, but looking at the exquisitely prepared dishes on the table, Eloise suddenly thought of the simple yet homely dishes Leonardo had cooked. She hadn't contacted him in quite a while. Eloise's thoughts drifted, making her somewhat absent-minded during the meal. Jim, even though you're busy with work, you should also focus on your love life. Your mom hasn't stopped complaining to me about how you're all work and no play. The conversation at the table took an unexpected turn, and Eloise snapped back to reality. Watching Jim's slightly embarrassed smile, she couldn't help but smirk. But before she could enjoy it for long, she heard her mother say, "You're almost 30. Isn't it time to think about your marriage? I remember you and Eloise used to date, right?" At this, Eloise's smile froze, and the piece of meat she had just picked up dropped back into her bowl. So, tonight was a setup. Their eyes met, each recognizing the shared sense of helplessness in the other's gaze. Eloise couldn't understand why, after their breakup with Jim, when her parents had responded indifferently, they were now trying to rekindle something between them years later. The rest of the evening was arduously spent, with her parents subtly trying to pair them up, and Eloise and Jim deflecting questions, on guard against their sly maneuvers. After dinner, they both breathed a sigh of relief. However, Axel and Niev didn't give up on their matchmaking and suggested the two of them take a walk in the garden. Unable to refuse, Eloise, under her parents' gazes, followed Jim outside. In the garden, Eloise and Jim walked side by side along the path, the awkwardness thick after the absurd dinner scene. "Seems your parents want us together." Jim eventually broke the silence. The atmosphere lightened slightly, and Eloise chuckled, her tone tinged with resignation. "Sorry, made you the butt of the joke." "No worries," Jim said, stopping and looking at Eloise, his brow raised, jokingly adding, "But I think Auntie makes a good point. Why not us?" Before he could finish, Eloise couldn't hold back her eye rolling. "Jim, stop being gross. Come on, I watched you grow up, and I was your first love. Don't you have any feelings for me at all?" "Stop, I feel embarrassed," Eloise retorted. Jim's smile faltered. He was a hot commodity in his circle, yet here he was being so disdainfully regarded. "Right, Eloise doesn't fancy me," Jim said, tone shifting. "So, how's that kid, Leonardo?" Eloise's expression faltered, her smile fading as she shot Jim a frosty look. "You investigated me?" Jim panicked, quickly surrendering. No misunderstanding, it was Levi who talked. Levi, the behind-the-scenes owner of Soft Rock Bar, a friend of Jim's since childhood. Eloise's icy demeanor thawed upon hearing this, as if nothing had happened. Levi was known for his gossip, so it wasn't surprising if he had shared with Jim. Jim observed Eloise's emotional changes, seemingly indifferent but internally marveling at who this Leonardo was to elicit such concern from Eloise. Initially, when Levi told him, he didn't take it seriously. Today's mention was just banter between friends. But seeing her reaction, something clicked and Jim's smile faded, his tone turning earnest and serious. "Eloise, don't tell me you're serious about this." The kid's background was also vaguely mentioned by Levi, a bartender at his bar, fresh out of college, handsome, but from a poor family. Jim knew Eloise was a sucker for good looks, so it wasn't surprising she'd be attracted to the young man. But now it seemed more serious than he thought. Hearing Jim's question, Eloise was momentarily stunned, meeting his unusually serious gaze, feeling inexplicably guilty. After a few seconds, Eloise looked away, smiling at the flowers in the distance. Just kidding. Yet, hearing Eloise's denial, Jim's mood grew heavier. Eloise, you're smart. I don't need to say much. That kid, have fun, but anything more is inappropriate. Eloise remained silent, her expression blank, seemingly unaffected by Jim's words, but only she knew what was going through her mind. Their departure was not exactly pleasant, but the atmosphere was heavy. After Jim left, facing her parents' hopeful eyes, Eloise couldn't help but explain, "Mom and Dad, there's no chance for me and Jim. You should drop those thoughts." Niamh's disappointment was evident. How can that be? You two grew up together. There must be some feelings. Mom, it's different. Then tell me, what kind of guy do you like? I'll keep an eye out for you, Niamh said, not discouraged, smiling again. Eloise experienced a mix of emotions. In the garden, Jim's words had unsettled her, and now, listening to her mother's almost pushy comments about marriage, irritation flared up. Mom, don't worry, I've got everything under control, she said, used to brushing off concerns. Axel, who had been silent, suddenly snapped. What do you mean? Don't worry about it. How old are you? Turning 25 soon. Before, however you played, I didn't interfere, but now you're the president of the QS Corporation branch, and in 2 years, the entire QS Corporation will be yours. You can't go back to your old ways, seeing all those messy individuals. Eloise's temples throbbed, her brow darkening. She'd heard her father complain about her previous boyfriends before, but when I thought of Leonardo, the term messy felt particularly annoying. So, in your eyes, what kind of person is suitable for your son-in-law? Eloise asked coldly, her tone tinged with sarcasm. Axel's expression remained stern as he snorted coldly. Someone like Jim is good. Then why ask me what I like? Their heated exchange created a tense atmosphere at their parents' home, and even Niamh, who had been seated, stood up nervously, forcing a smile. Eloise, your dad is just looking out for you. You were young before, so we didn't say much, but you've been playing around long enough. Maybe it's time to settle down? We're not asking you to be a housewife, but seriously dating someone is necessary, not like before, switching every 1 or 2 months. Niamh's words made sense, and Eloise knew her emotions were off, so she pursed her lips and softened her tone. I understand. I'll be more careful in the future. Hearing her daughter's assurance, Axel and Niamh's expressions eased. It was getting late, and after a few casual chats, Eloise left her parents' house. Driving her red Porsche on the road, the night had fallen, the warm yellow streetlights casting fleeting shadows on her face, her expression unclear. The woman was expressionless, but her gaze was deep, like a tranquil sea on a rainy night. The surface appears calm yet hides intense turmoil beneath. The car halted at a red light, Eloise gripping the steering wheel with one hand, the other resting on the edge, her index finger pressing against her lips, her gaze narrowed at the empty intersection. Eloise, don't tell me you're serious. That kid, have fun, but anything more is inappropriate. But you've been playing around long enough. Maybe it's time to settle down? These snippets echoed in her mind, conflicting, a fire burning her rationale, hinting at something through the heat. As the red light counted down, Eloise's eyes darkened, her hand quickly turning on the indicator, and as the light turned green, she spun the wheel, stomping on the accelerator. The apartment at 9 o'clock at night was deathly silent. The lights were off in the living room, the man sitting in a lazy chair near the balcony, moonlight spilling in, casting a faint glow on his pale skin, illuminating half the room. He didn't like overly bright things. He preferred to hide in the darkness, quietly alone. He had once imagined that one day, he might die in a corner, silently. To him, it wasn't a terrifying thought, but rather a kind of relief. The man, fresh from a shower, carried a faint fragrance as cold as himself. It was his day off, and the night before, he had heard colleagues complain about her. Yes, she hadn't been to soft rock in a long time. A bartender there seemed particularly fond of her, and her name, Eloise, often came up. Like a spell, it haunted his mind. He thought that short and intense passion must have fizzled out, and she might have moved on to another handsome young man, like Patrick. They were from different worlds, intersecting lines that would only meet at a point. Now, that point had passed, and they should have no further intersection. This was good. It should be this way. He had said it before. He didn't like bright things, and Eloise was too dazzling, barging into his life, catching him off guard. And now, having swept through, she was ready to pull back. Thinking of this, Leonardo felt a chill, letting his body sink into the sofa, as if feeling warmer that way. Suddenly, the silence of the living room was broken by a cell phone ringtone. When Leonardo hurriedly came downstairs, he was greeted by the long-absent woman. It was the height of summer, though the evening breeze was cool despite the day's heat. The woman leaned against her red Porsche. Her black slip dress highlights her captivating form. Her camel-colored blazer hung loosely, its collar draped over her forearm, showcasing her slender arms and perfect right-angled shoulders. Her collarbones were sharply defined, a masterpiece of a painter. Her black hair flowed behind her, strands fluttering in the breeze, along with the gray-white smoke of her cigarette. She was holding a slim lady's cigarette, the orange-red glow stark against the darkness, flickering. Ashtrays drifted with the wind, landing on his heart, feeling scorching. Their gazes met, her eyes gleaming like stars in the sky. Everything was so quiet, no chirping insects, no surrounding noise, only the occasional breeze and his heartbeat, echoing in his ears, again and again. After an unknown time, the woman's lips parted, her voice, laced with the seductive scent of tobacco, swept through the summer night. Leonardo, do you want to be with me? Seriously? Chapter 18. The cigarette still smoldered between Eloise's fingers as she watched Leonardo descend the stairs, but she didn't take another puff. For some reason, she didn't snuff it out either, letting it burn, as if it offered some relief from the inner turmoil and irritation. A cool breeze swept past, billowing the man's oversized t-shirt, revealing his slender frame, his expression startled, soft hair fluttering in the air, and a faint scent lingering in the air, the smell of his shower gel. Out of nowhere, she found herself standing before him, blurting out those words unexpectedly. Their eyes locked, and Leonardo's usually dull gaze now sparkled with tiny specks of light. It wasn't clear how much time had passed, but the cigarette had burned down to the filter, finally causing Eloise to drop it from the heat. Leonardo seemed to snap back to reality, his lips parting slightly, his demeanor returning to the initial coldness. However, the fist clenched at his side betrayed the torrent of emotions he was feeling. "You're drunk." Leonardo's gaze shifted, looking at the cigarette, but near her feet, still glowing faintly, as if reminding him that the words just spoken were not a dream. Eloise narrowed her eyes, and after a moment, she extended her hand towards Leonardo. "Come here." Leonardo's gaze paused, looking at the slender, fair hand, memories flooding his mind of their last parting. Back then, she had also extended her hand to him. His eyelashes fluttered, and after a few seconds, he stepped closer to her direction. Knowing what might come next, he seemed to have no intention of resisting. Completely different from his initial encounter with her, Leonardo knew that something was spiraling out of control. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. That quiet hand suddenly moved, grabbing his collar and pulling him fiercely towards her. Though prepared, the swift shortening of distance still made Leonardo gasp. Forced to lower his head, Leonardo looked at the face so close to his, yet he couldn't gauge her emotions at all. "Leonardo, I'm not drunk." Leonardo was slightly stunned, the familiar scent of her perfume filling his nose in that breath, no hint of alcohol. She wasn't drunk, whether the words were sincere or a joke, she was sober. Leonardo pressed his lips together, instinctively avoiding her gaze. The overly intense gaze seemed to burn through his pretense, revealing the truth he didn't even dare to admit to himself. Yet, she didn't give him a chance to evade. Her hand tugging at his collar tightened, forcing him to meet her eyes again. "Leonardo, look at me," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I know this request is sudden for you. Maybe you think I'm joking. I've indeed had many relationships before, mostly with a mutually beneficial mindset. Those people weren't important to me. I admit you feel different to me. I have feelings for you. Maybe not just feelings, at least compared to my previous boyfriends. You bring me a unique experience." The words akin to a confession made Leonardo's breath hitch, staring at her with a stunned expression. Her expression was earnestly serious, something he had never seen before. From the day they met, Eloise's eyes had always been confident and bold, occasionally flashing with teasing and banter, the look she gave him when he was flustered. It was as if she had casually set a fire on him, only to stand across and watch him panic, smiling indifferently. So, he had always thought that all this was just a joke she was playing to pass the time. He had dutifully guarded his heart, knowing her actions, her behavior, her expressions, and every word she said couldn't be taken seriously. But now, she was tugging at his collar, telling him she wasn't joking, she was serious. "I'm laying out all my thoughts openly, because dating is a matter of two people," Eloise said, gradually loosening his collar, as if giving him the freedom to choose. "Leonardo, tell me, what do you think?" Leonardo stood straight in front of Eloise, looking down at her, his fist clenched at his side, the bulging veins on the back of his hand enough to show how tumultuous his emotions were. His expression was as always cold, but his eyes were more complex than ever. Thoughts churned within him, as if 1,000 hands were tearing at him. Restlessness, anxiety, unease, all negative emotions surged forth, and he could only desperately control his expression, trying to appear less pathetic in front of her. Eloise were not compatible. His deep voice carried on the breeze, neither loud nor soft, as if stating an obvious fact. Yet, the hidden emotion beneath it was like a silent lament, the sorrow akin to a hurricane, suffocating with despair. Hearing this, Eloise's eyes darkened slightly, showing no anger at this rejection. She maintained her composure, calm to the point of being terrifying, making Leonardo clearly understand the gap between them. "Leonardo, I don't want results. I want reasons," Eloise said, her tone exceptionally steady, like negotiations in the business world. "Tell me, where are we incompatible?" No couple is perfectly matched before confirming their relationship. "Different," Leonardo said, his tone urgent. "Eloise, you and I are from different worlds. I'm not what you think I am." Gloomy, sensitive, pessimistic. He was a man rotten to the core, and one day, she would discover what kind of person he really was, and then she would grow tired, irritated, and disgusted. This relationship might be a small chapter in her rich emotional life, but for him, it was a high-stakes gamble. If he lost, he didn't even know what his outcome would be. Eloise was slightly stunned, as if wanting to say something, but ultimately closed her mouth, saying nothing. The atmosphere grew heavy, and it wasn't clear how much time passed before Eloise spoke again, her voice tinged with a vulnerability she hadn't realized. "I'll ask you one last time, do you want to be with me?" "Seriously." His pupils dilated, frozen in place as if petrified. 2 minutes later, a soft laugh echoed. "I see," Eloise said, showing no signs of sadness, just a faint trace of regret. With that, she turned, opened the driver's door of the car, and left. Her departure was too casual, too clean, not even an extra word. Almost reflexively, Leonardo reached out, but just as he was about to touch her, his fingertips stopped in midair, not daring to move forward. "I wish you a pleasant life." A genuinely sincere blessing, but to Leonardo, it sounded so harsh. Eloise didn't notice Leonardo's small action. She was never one to drag things out or get entangled. Since being rejected, she should leave cleanly. Open the door, get in the car, close the door, a series of actions smoothly executed. The red Porsche disappeared in less than a minute, without a moment's hesitation, and he could only watch her fade into the distance, until she vanished from sight. It had been over half a month since her confession was rejected, and the company's projects were also on track, with fewer tasks on her shoulders. For the past half-month, Eloise had immersed herself in work, giving herself little time to rest. It wasn't exactly a traumatic response from a breakup, but it was close. Once idle, her mind would constantly replay that scene. It was her first time being rejected, and so decisively too. There was sadness. She did have genuine feelings for Leonardo, and she had earnestly requested to be with him, to have a serious relationship. This notion had never occurred to her in her 20-plus years, only after meeting him. But the reality was, she was dumped, brutally so. There was embarrassment, but more confusion, not understanding why Leonardo rejected her, what he meant by those words. "I'm not what you think I am." That meant nothing to her. She believed in what she saw, what she felt. Leonardo wasn't perfect, of humble background, not gentle in nature, and, apart from his looks, nothing particularly commendable. But inexplicably, she was attracted to him. Her gaze was fixed on him, unable to see anything else. In the quiet office, Eloise looked at the documents on the desk, then angrily threw down the pen in her hand, frowning, her expression severely gloomy. She raised her hand to rub her aching brow, desperately restraining the rage threatening to erupt. Damn it, it's been half a month, why hasn't she gotten over it? She never dwelled this long after previous breakups. Eloise silently complained, the irritation in her heart unmanageable. Lately, there had been little work at the company, and sometimes while looking through files, Leonardo's face would pop into her mind. Honestly, giving up on him like this, she really didn't feel quite right about it. But what could she do? She'd been rejected twice. She couldn't possibly continue to bother him, could she? Being turned down was already embarrassing enough. Her pride wouldn't allow her to keep pestering him. 10 minutes later, she picked up the pen again, forcing herself back into work. But not long after, a slightly hurried knock sounded on the office door. "Come in." As soon as the voice fell, the office door was pushed open from the outside, and Luke hurried in with a tablet in hand, his expression unusually serious. "Eloise, Patrick's in trouble." Eloise's hand holding the pen paused, her eyes meeting Luke's, immediately realizing the severity of the situation. "What happened?" Eloise accepted the tablet from Luke, glancing at the exposé on the screen, her expression gradually turning grim. Patrick was caught partying and alleged to be using drugs last night, taken away from his apartment by the police 10 minutes ago. Her hand kept sliding through the photos posted on X, her expression becoming increasingly grim. The location of the photos was a villa in the suburbs, and because the curtains weren't drawn, the scene inside was clear. Perhaps it was at night, so the image quality wasn't clear, but Patrick's face was discernible. In the photo, Patrick was on the balcony of the villa, making a phone call, while several others were sitting on the sofa inside, apparently using some substance. Although there wasn't a clear shot of Patrick using drugs, just being in the same frame was enough to fuel public imagination. A popular star using drugs. That's a stain that's impossible to wash away. Eloise skimmed through the comments, the storm of chaos making her curse inwardly. Her mood wasn't great to begin with, and now this incident was making her more agitated. She slammed the tablet on the desk, her expression terrifying, making Luke beside her start to tremble. "Have you contacted his agent?" Confirmed he used the drugs. Patrick was the star she personally promoted after joining the company. Their relationship wasn't particularly deep, but his popularity had helped her secure a footing in the boardroom. Patrick was still on the rise, with both looks and talent. His future prospects were undoubtedly bright, and the benefits he brought to the company would only increase. It wasn't easy to promote a star. She had no reason to easily give up this cash cow. However, Eloise had her moral bottom line. If Patrick really did touch those things, no matter how promising his commercial future, she wouldn't save him. "Luke," from the agent's tone, it seems Patrick was set up this time. Thump! Eloise slammed her hand on the desk. Even the files on it shook, scaring Luke into instinctively holding his breath. Her expression was as dark as the bottom of a pot. In the 2 years Luke had been with the company, he had rarely seen Eloise with such an expression. It was a dangerous signal. Set up? Huh, he must be brainless. He's been set up enough since his debut. Does he really think the company will keep cleaning up after him? Luke listened to Eloise's scolding, gradually lowering his head, desperately reducing his presence, fearing the anger might accidentally land on him. Over the past 2 years, Patrick's rise had been explosive, reaching this position in just 2 years, a feat that left everyone in the industry astonished. However, the higher the tree, the stronger the wind, the more popular Patrick became, the more envious and jealous people there were. Patrick hadn't been unscathed in the past. Every time Eloise had come to his aid, her attitude was extremely lenient, as if she would stand up for him no matter what. That's why Luke had once mistaken his boss's relationship with Patrick. After all, no one would unreasonably cover for another's mistakes. And Eloise had not only covered for Patrick's mistakes once or twice, and each time without complaint, so naturally. Although this time Patrick had really stirred up a mess, the root cause was being framed. But why did Eloise sound like she was holding Patrick accountable? Investigate. The public and media believe in evidence. There's nothing he can say in his current situation. Half a minute later, Eloise had adjusted her mindset, grabbing her car keys and standing up from her chair, giving orders to Luke. Stay in touch with Patrick's team, monitor the trends online, and guide the public opinion towards the victim angle. I'm going to pick up Patrick. If it turns out he really touched those things, discuss with his agent how to write a retirement statement. Luke's mouth twitched as he watched Eloise leave, secretly lighting a candle for Patrick. Half an hour later, the black Land Rover pulled up at the police station. After entering the police station, Eloise quickly spoke with the person in charge for half an hour before she managed to complete the formalities and bail Patrick out. Fortunately, the urine test results were positive and Patrick hadn't used drugs. Even so, the photos showing him in the same room as several drug users hadn't cleared his suspicion. Failure to report and malicious indulgence, such accusations, in the eyes of the public, were still unforgivable. After bailing Patrick out, Eloise called Luke and instructed the studio to immediately release the urine test results and related statements the moment she found out. After finalizing everything, Eloise drove Patrick back to his apartment. The atmosphere in the car was heavy. Patrick knew he had caused a big trouble this time, so he kept his head down the whole time, his expression still showing traces of panic. He admitted he was in a daze. From the moment the police came to his door saying he was suspected of drug use, to being taken to the hospital for a checkup, and now being bailed out of the police station by Eloise, he was in a state of confusion. "How did you meet those people?" Eloise suddenly asked in the quiet car. Patrick in the passenger seat was startled, quickly looking up at Eloise, then back down, his voice trembling as he said, "I met them at the Big Soft charity gala." Patrick recalled the scene of meeting those people for the first time. That day, at the Big Soft charity gala, he was harshly reprimanded by Eloise, and since then, he had been harboring resentment. Feeling depressed but remembering Eloise's words, he forced himself to socialize with others at the gala. As if trying to prove something, he desperately tried to fit into their circle, so when they suggested a drink at the bar after the gala, he agreed without hesitation. The young masters in the circle were generally good at having fun. The bar wasn't just for drinking, they played for pleasure. Seeing them with their arms around girls, Patrick grew more depressed and irritable, so he sat in the corner drinking, eventually losing his guard and joining them. Later, they exchanged contact details and met up occasionally. Patrick knew they were wild, but he never imagined they would dare to go this far. If he had known, he would never have agreed to go to the bar with them, nor would there have been so many subsequent gatherings. You're quite capable. There were so many big shots at the gala, yet you had to get entangled with those trash. The sarcasm in her words made Patrick's expression even worse. I didn't know they were using drugs. I'm not stupid. Why would I do something that ruins my career? The boy, in extreme panic, suddenly exploded, raising his voice to refute. The next moment, Eloise slammed on the brakes, and the black Land Rover came to an abrupt stop on the roadside. Patrick seemed to finally calm down, staring into Eloise's eyes, which were as cold as an ice cave, making him shiver, and his wildly beating heart gradually sank. "Patrick, I thought you were just young and inexperienced, but it seems you're truly brainless," Eloise said, her tone laced with sharp ridicule, her gaze on him filled with disappointment, like a knife, deeply stabbing Patrick. "The industry is messy, you're not unaware. I don't mind your socializing, but playing with people you've known for less than a month, have you no vigilance? And those people, what kind of scum are they? Don't tell me you have no idea," Eloise said, stating the facts most calmly. "Patrick, don't think that just because you're a bit famous, you can be careless. Look at how many people are waiting for your downfall. The company promoting you is for your sake. There are plenty of people in the industry striving to make a name for themselves. There are those more talented than you. If you mess around like this, don't blame the company for being merciless." Patrick listened, his eyes red, his fists clenched, his teeth gritted as he said, "Don't talk about the company. Isn't it you who's in charge? In the end, isn't it just that you don't want to promote me anymore?" "Patrick, do you know what you're saying?" Eloise said, her expression extremely cold. "The ultimate goal of any decision made by the company is for profit. I admit that when I promoted you, there were some personal emotions involved, because I sensed your ambition to succeed. I admired that ambition of yours, so on the basis of you bringing certain benefits to the company, I decided to promote you. Patrick, wake up. There are plenty of people in the industry who are better looking and more talented than you. I couldn't even look at them. What makes you think you're attractive to me?" These words were too harsh. Patrick's pupils quivered as he gazed at Eloise's taunting face. It was only now that he suddenly realized he seemed to have never truly understood Eloise's heart. Looking away, Patrick lowered his head, his mind filled with memories of their past interactions. When the truth was revealed, it was cruel. Patrick started to realize that everything before had been one-sided wishful thinking. The atmosphere in the car returned to silence, and after an unknown period, Patrick spoke again. "Eloise, I really like you." Eloise's gaze on the road darkened, her grip on the steering wheel tightened, her thoughts drifting back to that night half a month ago. The cool breeze, the faint smell of tobacco mixed with the cold scent from his body, his deep voice echoing in her mind. "We're not compatible." It was laughable. Who would have thought that the one who coldly rebuked someone else for daydreaming at this moment, half a month ago, had also been coldly rejected? "I have someone I like." Eloise's voice was faint, as if from afar, revealing a helplessness she hadn't noticed. Patrick was slightly startled, then pursed his lips and continued, "I can wait. I've waited before." The conversation reached this point, and Eloise couldn't help but chuckle, "As you wish." Indeed, only someone his age could say such naive things. Who would waste their time on someone who wouldn't respond? Time would erase everything, no matter how passionate the feelings. After 5, 10, 20 years, they would fade. Eloise dropped Patrick off at his apartment, then hurried back to the company. The studio, upon receiving Eloise's instructions, immediately released relevant statements. The overwhelmingly negative comments online saw a slight shift after learning that Patrick hadn't used drugs, but the overall situation remained unfavorable. Patrick had many rivals. Having been exposed to such a scandal at this time, everyone wanted to take the opportunity to pull him down. As soon as Eloise returned to the company, Luke came into the office with the preliminary investigation information. According to the investigation, the other 3 people in the photos had indeed attended the previous Big Soft charity gala. They were all rich second generation in the industry. That villa belonged to one of them, a private property. Normally, paparazzi wouldn't be able to get near it. That villa area was known to Eloise for its high security. That's why those rich second generation dared to do such outrageous things there. In theory, the paparazzi shouldn't even be able to get through the gates of the villa area, so how could they possibly get such photos? Were there only 4 people in the villa, including Patrick? Eloise put down the information in her hand, rubbing her brow as she asked. According to the surveillance footage, there were 5 people in total who entered the villa around 6:30. The 5 of them barbecued in the back garden of the villa. Then, after an hour and a half, one of them seemed to have left the villa halfway because of something. The time of the photo leak should have been around 8:30. Luke explained, pausing for 2 seconds before continuing. 10 minutes ago, Mr. Kim from Plato's Corporation called, saying he wanted to collaborate with you. Plato's Corporation? Mr. Kim? Eloise lifted her eyes slightly. Yes, one of the 3 arrested was Mr. Kim's son, and that villa was a birthday gift Mr. Kim gave his son last year. Mr. Kim's intention is to find the mastermind behind this and take revenge, so he... Eloise sneered at this. Such a person is truly rotten to the core. When his son was arrested for drug use, his first reaction was to find the perpetrator. But he and Mr. Kim did have a common goal now. If he wanted to help, she certainly wouldn't refuse. What information does he have? Mr. Kim mentioned that the person who left early in the surveillance footage is named Lim, the son of their family's nanny, who grew up with his son. He used to follow his son around all the time, but it was just on the day of the incident that he left early. Moreover, according to the information, 3 days before the incident, a large sum of $50,000 had inexplicably appeared in one of Lim's bank accounts, so it seems Mr. Kim suspects Lim is the one who backstabbed them? Eloise raised her eyebrows. Honestly, $50,000 wasn't a lot of money to them, but for an ordinary family, it was indeed a large sum. Yes, Mr. Kim currently believes it was Lim behind the scenes, but there is a major difficulty for him now in that he can't find any evidence. The $50,000 also can't be traced back, proving nothing. And Lim has disappeared without a trace after cooperating with the police investigation. What were Lim's test results? Negative, no drugs. The truth now seemed clear, but the key was still to find out who had instructed Lim. If it was due to malicious commercial competition, Patrick would have to accept his bad luck. If it was really the work of rivals, it would be easier to whitewash his image later, perhaps even gaining some public sympathy. At this thought, Eloise's head started to throb again. She could even predict the green stocks of QS Corporation tomorrow. Those old board members would probably seize this point to criticize. What's with this situation? Heartache from love is one thing, but why throw this at her? At 10 o'clock at night, the soft rock bar was bustling. Leonardo stood at the bar, his handsome appearance and cold temperament attracting many women's glances. Since Leonardo started working at Soft Rock, the number of women coming to the bar had increased, their intentions not purely for the drinks, and the bar's sales were indeed on the rise. Whenever this happened, the bar manager would stand in the corner, looking at Leonardo, marveling at his own foresight. Leonardo didn't know the thoughts of the bar manager, just quietly standing in his position, taking care of his duties. One angel's kiss, please. His expression paused, his heartbeat unexpectedly skipping a beat. A fragment suddenly flashed through his mind, and as he looked up, he saw another unfamiliar face. A hint of disappointment passed through his heart. Leonardo pursed his lips, his expression suddenly a bit colder. The customer didn't notice Leonardo's anomaly. Having placed the order, she was ready to return to her seat, leaving instructions to send it over later before leaving the bar. Leonardo was stirring the drinks, but his mind uncontrollably recalled the scene of his first encounter with someone. The memories that once went unnoticed now feel valuable, but everything had already ended, just as he had deliberately poured the angel's kiss down the sink from the start, just as he had firmly rejected her request half a month ago. 10 minutes later, Leonardo carried the prepared drink to the booth. The customers seemed to be here with colleagues from the company, discussing topics related to the economy. Leonardo set down the drink and turned to leave, but he suddenly stopped after 3 seconds. Do you think QS Corporation's stock will fall tomorrow? Possibly, with such a scandal involving their artist. Although the authenticity isn't confirmed, it will definitely have some impact. But with QS Corporation size, it's not something an artist can sway. It's just that the newly appointed Eloise might have a tough time. To be honest, that Eloise is just infatuated. Back then, she promoted that kid Patrick. Wasn't it just because he was handsome? That's not necessarily true. Patrick's rise in the past 2 years has been significant, and he's brought in a lot of money for the company. Eloise's promotion of him couldn't have been just based on looks. However, it's true that Eloise got herself into trouble this time. Leonardo's hand holding the tray tightened, his expressionless face darkened, and after a moment, he continued walking back to the bar. This was the second time he had heard about their relationship from strangers. It seemed that everyone knew Patrick's name was tied to Eloise's. But right now, he didn't have the energy to care about those messy relationships. All he could think about was Eloise getting involved because of Patrick. Leonardo tossed the tray aside, sharply turning on the faucet, his face full of anger as he roughly washed the cocktail tools in the sink, as if venting his anger on them. The murderous aura around him was too heavy, his expression terrifying, scaring several women who wanted to order drinks into turning around and leaving, afraid to bump into him. The bar manager who was entertaining guests seemed to notice something was wrong, glancing towards the bar, unexpectedly meeting the man's angry face, unable to help but secretly complain, "Oh my, did someone dig up his ancestral grave?" The bar manager had no choice but to finish entertaining the guests and quickly walked towards Leonardo, tapping the bar counter lightly, interrupting his tantrum. "Hey, buddy, you're here to sell drinks, not to kill. Can you rein in your emotions a bit?" The bar manager said with a wry smile, not daring to scold him outright. Leonardo's hands paused, only then realizing how foolish his actions had been. After a few seconds, he turned off the faucet, suppressing the gloom on his face, returning to his usual expressionless state, as if nothing had happened. The bar manager saw through the man's quick change of face, his mouth twitching. Then he couldn't help but ask, "What happened? Care to share?" "Nothing," Leonardo coldly rejected, naturally not revealing his inner thoughts. However, Leonardo's silence didn't mean others couldn't guess. Let me guess, is it about Eloise?" As soon as the voice fell, the cocktail spoon Leonardo had just picked up fell back into the sink. The bar manager saw this and understood the situation, laughing softly. "Worried about her?" "I'm not." The man immediately rebutted, so quickly it was startling, but precisely because of this, it made him even more suspicious. "Don't worry, with Eloise's methods, such a small matter can be resolved in less than 3 days. The bar manager said, patting Leonardo's shoulder with the air of an experienced person. "I know you young people love face. If you're really worried, just call her directly." Leonardo turned his head away, his lips still tightly pressed, his eyes flashing with complex emotions, hard to fathom. As for Eloise and Patrick's relationship, don't overthink it. Hearing this, Leonardo's gaze flickered slightly. Eloise doesn't have that kind of interest in him. Right now, she's only interested in you. With that, the bar manager smilingly left the bar, completely disregarding how this statement might stir up a storm in someone's heart. Right now, is only interested in you.